Namaskar and welcome to India Science. It is our endeavor to take science to the masses and to raise the bar of the scientific temper of the citizens of India. We bring to you a candid conversation today with the Secretary Biotechnology, Dr. Renu Swarup. Many thanks for joining us today, ma'am. Namaste and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
My first question to you would be about your department. As biotechnology is now leading the way forward for all kinds of ways to battle this pandemic, what are your various insights into your department?
Thank you for this, Nidhi. The COVID-19 pandemic has been an unprecedented situation which none of us had ever imagined. And biotechnology has always contributed through its interventions to each of the areas, whether it's healthcare, agriculture, environment. This was a particular instance that we had where the biotechnology interventions had to come forward to look at what were the various solutions we could provide to mitigate this health challenge, whether it is for vaccines, whether it is for therapeutics or diagnostics or other interventions. So, our scientists, our researchers, our startups, our industry have all come together very quickly, collectively in a collaborative manner to respond to this very unforeseen situation that we have.
An emergency situation, as we would all call it. We're still living in that and getting used to living in that. On that note, ma'am, I'd like to know from you, you just mentioned consortium of public, private, researchers, academia, all kinds of industrialists coming out. Maybe some grassroots people like farmers and all also who have come up with their own ideas. Would you like to elaborate on this consortium and what kind of research is happening there?
So, when this whole pandemic was declared in January, the Department of Biotechnology took immediate action on that, and it was, I think, very early in February itself that we put together this consortium. We prepared a roadmap, a strategy for what should be our R&D efforts, what should be our translational efforts, what should be the product developmental activities. In fact, when WHO did its first meeting, the DBT action plan as the blueprint was presented in that meeting early in February itself. We then put out a call as well to bring together the various research groups. The DBT and BIRAC, which is our public sector, put out a joint DBT BIRAC call inviting researchers to come together in a collaborative mode to be able to respond. And as I said, these different verticals that we are looking at, we were looking at immediate solutions because for the pandemic, we obviously, while it's very important to understand the virus, to do a long term deep science into it, our immediate need was how do we bring in solutions which respond immediately. How do we get quick diagnostic kits which can help us to become self-reliant on our diagnostic testing, which was important. How do we very quickly embark on our roadmap to get vaccines developed, because India is known for its whole vaccine development. It's a challenge to bring in people, but I must say that with the foresight of this government, we had already created a very vibrant platform where industry and academia were already interacting very well. We had the National Biopharma Mission in which we had already brought together the researchers and startups. We have BIRAC with its startup grants. We had industry academia collaborations of our autonomous institute. This platform gave them an opportunity to come together because they had a common goal and a common objective. So, while the challenge is there, but I think we were very happy and pleased to see how quickly people came together in a collaborative mode, and you can see yourself the results which are now telling you how well they have collaborated in this.
Absolutely. You just mentioned about everybody coming together collectively and working towards the progressive good of all. I'd like to ask you here, ma'am, about you mentioned vaccine and you mentioned virus. Now, what stage of this virus and what are the kind of mutations that it has gone into, and also what is the kind of research that you're doing as by means of genomes, which is something very recently I read a press report about that. So, could you elaborate on that? the 100K genomes or something?
So, you see, this virus is something which we are still trying to understand. The scientists, the researchers, although we did have SARS earlier, but this is a SARS-CoV-2. So, every virus strain has its own new understanding, which is important, not just from understanding the transmission part of it, understanding the infection part of it, but also in being able to devise treatments for it, and devise diagnostics for it, to get the vaccines, because all that development needs an understanding of the virus. So, our scientists have taken on the task of doing the sequencing of the genome of the virus and characterizing the virus. While there are a lot of efforts going on within the country, the Department of Biotechnology's autonomous institutes together took up this task of 1000 genome sequencing. In fact, our minister had taken a review meeting on 28th of April, and through the discussions, when he spoke with us, the scientists immediately came forward and said, we will launch a 1000 genome program, and that was announced by the Honorable Minister. And we were very pleased when they could finish this task so very quickly. They have completed the sequencing of the 1000 genomes. They are now analyzing the data. It's being put into the public domain, which we have a global database, so that researchers from all over can use this data now to understand what will be the infection. There is a detailed analysis which is going on in terms of how the virus has changed. Is the virus that is coming in from Wuhan different from the one which is coming from UK and Europe? The initial results have not been able to give us too much of data that we can now start the inference on, but that analysis is still going on. Very shortly they will have the data on that. But what has come out from the first set of information is that whatever changes or mutations you see are not in those regions of the genome which are going to impact the vaccine development or the diagnostic development. So, there are certain regions within that genome which, if those get mutated, the vaccine development will have to change, or we will have to look at how quickly it will change. But the initial data says that that particular region has not really been mutated, but we are still looking at the data as it comes in.
On that note, we are going in for a short break. Stay tuned, keep watching India Science.
India Science is an internet-based science TV channel initiated by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, implemented and managed by Vigyan Prasar. India Science on the URL www.indiascience.in is a bilingual channel with content in Hindi and English. It can be accessed on any internet-enabled device. This video platform is dedicated to science and technology knowledge dissemination with a strong commitment to spreading scientific awareness, especially with Indian perspectives, ethos and cultural context. The India Science mobile app can be downloaded from the Google Play Store and Apple Store.
You're watching a special edition of India Science, and we are talking to the Secretary Biotechnology, Dr. Renu Swarup. Ma'am, just before the break we spoke about vaccines and we spoke about a little research. So I would like to now ask you about the diagnostics part of it. How would you like to share your thoughts on that?
The diagnostic development which has happened for the COVID-19, it's a very interesting activity which has happened within the country. Interesting and yet also very satisfying to see that our young researchers and startups in industry have responded to this immediate need of the country. We have a lot of startups who were into this work of diagnostic development, a lot of academic research groups. When COVID-19, we had this pandemic, it was very clear that for any medical attention to this, the first point is diagnostics, because you have to diagnose the disease and then only you can go forward. We were totally dependent on imported diagnostic kits to come in. We have been looking at developing an indigenous development program, but in this time of the pandemic it became all the more necessary because there was a disruption of the supply chains. Globally, there was a need for diagnostic kits. So, India was totally dependent on what comes in at what time, and that is really what gave us the motivation and the challenge that we posed before our researchers, that we have to become 100% self-reliant. We were very pleased to see the response. In fact, on 26th of March, if I remember correctly, the first Indian manufacturer, which was supported by BIRAC, got cleared, and their diagnostic kit got approved by my lab, and that got approved by ICMR. Thereafter, we had a large number of indigenous companies who came up with their diagnostic development. We also then set up immediately at the Andhra MedTech zone a manufacturing hub to facilitate the indigenous startups and industries to do their own indigenous manufacturing. We then realized that there was also a need to bring in indigenously the reagents, the components and different other parts which will help this diagnostic test development. That was also becoming a challenge. So, it was important for us to look at the entire gamut of activities which go along with it. NBRIC, which is the National Biotech Resource Indigenization Consortium, got formed. So, you see within this very short spell, so many activities happened because the response was very quick. This was driven by ABLE, which is the Association for Biotech-led Entrepreneurs, CII. We had Dr. Kiran Majumdar, who took on the responsibility to chair this board. We had CCAMP, which has again been within the whole biotech cluster that we have established at Bangalore. They are a part of it. They came forward, and this consortium, it was really creating a platform for industries and startups who are anyway developing kits and components, oligos, primers, all of those for different other tests, and said, can you now start responding to COVID-19? So, what we did is we actually did a demand aggregation, and we ensured that there would be a supply of the need that is there. Today, within less than 3 months, we had 100% indigenous kit development with all indigenous components, and we have today capacities to produce over 10 lakh kits per day. So, this is really a wonderful success story. This is clearly our commitment to the call that our Prime Minister gave of an Atmanirbhar Bharat.
I was about to say
and
that,
this is what is our first step. We are now taking this forward and saying, from diagnostics to vaccines to therapeutics, can we have all indigenously developed platforms, not just for the country, but also to respond to the needs of the world. And I am confident that they would be able to.
Could you tell us a little more about the therapeutics part, because we dealt with diagnostics. What is your take on the therapeutics?
So, there is a lot which is happening in the therapeutics area within the complete government system, the private sector and all the academic groups. The Department of Biotechnology is focused on 1 or 2 major activities that we have taken up for therapeutics. One is of course the Ayush route, where we are looking at finding from our traditional knowledge, from our traditional plants, what could be those remedies. We have started a major program with the Ministry of Ayush. So, there is a joint DBT Ayush program that we have launched, where we are looking at some of these known plants in which they are doing the characterization of the compound, so that the trials would begin. Ayush has started a trial with CSIR for 4 of the plants. We are actually doing the characterization of that. So, there is a large program which is moving on. One of the DBT institutes, ICGB, had worked with Sun Pharma, and they had one of the traditional plants. They had been able to look at a drug for dengue, and very quickly when COVID came on, they started doing a study to see whether that same drug could be repositioned for COVID, and they went to the drug controller, they have got the approval, and now currently the trials have begun. It is a little early for me to tell you what the results are, but yes, that is on. So, that is the traditional knowledge, the Ayush route that we are looking at and taking it, in addition to botanical groups, and we work very closely with them to take it forward. So, that is one of our routes. Other areas of therapeutics that we are looking at is, one is of course the monoclonal antibodies, and that is something that we feel is going to be very important.
A game changer.
It should be able to bring in a huge intervention. We have got groups who have already started working on it. It will take a little while, because here again you are looking at monoclonals which are specific for COVID. They have to get them from they needed samples of the COVID patients. When we began this research, we began it, as I told you, way back in February. Fortunately, the country did not have COVID patients. We just had access to 3 patients who had come in from Wuhan, the first 3 in Kerala, and we were trying to bring in their, because you needed convalescent sera. So, we were waiting for them to recover and get their patients, but yes, of course, now we do have a large number of COVID patients, but it was important for us to collect that. So, that research has begun. It will take a little while, and then it needs to get into clinical trials and get the approvals. We are also looking at trying to see how we could do the fractionation of the IgGs from the plasma of COVID patients. So, while you hear about plasma therapy, which has been showing its results in many cases, we are actually looking at the fractionation of the IgGs, the immunoglobulins, so that those can then directly be used as a formulation that can be, injected and can give you the treatment for it. But this research is also going on, and as I said, this should be entering clinical trials very soon. They have already approached the drug controller for approval. So, many activities like this are moving. There is a lot of other antiviral screening that they are doing we already have libraries of compounds, so they are screening them for their antiviral activity for COVID, but that is research which is still going on and take some while to come in, but that's our work on therapy.
If you could throw some light on Sepi, ma'am, and what has been the progress there in these last few months, what all are we looking at?
So, Sepi is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation. When this was launched in 2017, the Government of India was one of its founder members when it got launched. I don't think we thought that we will have a pandemic which will come in so well. So, we spoke about epidemics at that point of time. But yes, it has given us a platform to prepare for a pandemic. So, Sepi, what we did is from India, we actually set up in Sepi mission. So, that was our India Sepi mission, which then got aligned with the Sepi mission, so that we worked along with them to look at preparedness within the country. So, as I said right in the beginning, many of these platforms that we created, which was a foresight of the government, gave us a wonderful opportunity to leapfrog and very quickly take forward and advance some of our research. So, as soon as this pandemic broke out, we put out a joint call with Sepi, and we did an in-Sepi and Sepi call asking for vaccine candidate development. So, we also put out our own DBT BIRAC consortium call. So, with Sepi, our engagement is now to see how many of our Indian manufacturers, and we have a number of them who have come forward. We have about 6 or 7 manufacturers and developers who have been able to look at different platforms of vaccines which are being developed. Sepi, which is the global body, and it is not just with India, they are obviously looking at all countries. They play a very major role in being able to look at what the vaccine development, vaccine trial, and their final manufacture framework will look like. Sepi and WHO and Gavi have collectively set up this ACT accelerator, which is access to COVID tools, and India has already sent its commitment to be a partner in this ACT accelerator. Sepi is already in discussion with us of they are setting up sort of global resources which can be made available to vaccine developers across the world. They are looking at centralized assay labs, they are looking at centralized protocols, they are looking at centralized access to animal resources, working with our manufacturers to see how our manufacturing capacities can be sort of ramped up. All these activities, India is a key partner, and for all the activities that we are supporting within the country, we are in continuous discussion and engagement with Sepi, not just for the finances part of it, which is key and crucial, but right now the finances are definitely a constraint globally, but I think it is more access to the networks, access to the experts, so that whatever we develop within the country is on the global platform, because we would want to see whatever vaccine gets developed within the country is part of the global network that gets established. So, that is really our engagement with Sepi.
You just spoke about vaccine development program. We've also been hearing about immunity development program vaccine, some immunity building vaccine that should be shortly coming up. Could you tell us more about that?
It's not an immunity building vaccine, but it's basically repurposing of the BCG vaccine, which Serum had already done. And as you know, India is one of the countries where BCG is one of our immunization program that we look at. So, data which is coming out globally suggests that BCG vaccine can also provide some levels of immunity for COVID. It was earlier tried for tuberculosis, and now the data suggested that it may come for COVID as well. So, Serum, which has their BCG vaccine, which they were trying for the tuberculosis as well, we have now partnered with them, we have supported them, and they have started a phase 3 trial which was done a couple of weeks back. In fact, they have completed the 6,000 volunteers recruitment, and this is mainly the health workers, because that's really where we want to see where the immunity levels are. So, this has now been completed. They have given for 6,000. It will take some time before the data starts coming in, probably another couple of weeks before we start getting the data to see how is this BCG vaccine which has been given providing immunity to the healthcare workers. If it works, we are hopeful, we are looking forward. We are always very hopeful of whatever we support in terms of research. That's really what science is all about. You have to always be hopeful till you get the result. And if it works, it will be a wonderful solution that we will have.
On that note, we are going in for a short break. Stay tuned, keep watching India Science.
India Science is an internet-based science TV channel initiated by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, implemented and managed by Vigyan Prasar. India Science on the URL www.indiascience.in is a bilingual channel with content in Hindi and English. It can be accessed on any internet-enabled device. This video platform is dedicated to science and technology knowledge dissemination with a strong commitment to spreading scientific awareness, especially with Indian perspectives, ethos and cultural context. The India Science mobile app can be downloaded from the Google Play Store and Apple Store.
You're watching a special edition of India Science, and we are talking to the Secretary Biotechnology, Dr. Renu Swarup. Ma'am, take us through these trials. How difficult or challenging are trials, and how do you look at them, once the process begins and the vaccine comes in? What is your understanding of how trials take place and how long it takes?
So, vaccine development is a very complex issue. Traditionally, if you look at the way vaccines are developed, it would be something from 10 to 14 years before you really have a vaccine rolling out. It starts from a discovery phase where you look at the initial vaccine development, you see what disease you are targeting, you see what is it that you are going to develop, what is the platform that you are going to use. You try and then work it out in terms of the entire discovery. Once you've been able to get a lead candidate, as they call it, you take it in for the animal studies, the preclinical tox studies, you do the toxicity part of it. You have to see, this is a vaccine which is going into a human being. You have to study it not just from the immunity levels it will provide, that's the immunogenicity, but you have to study it from the safety viewpoint to see that there are no adverse effects. The toxicity, is it going to give you some toxic effects? So, it first tested on animals, after it's, and different models of animals, infection models. So, that's a complex model. It then gets into human trials after it satisfies all the experts and the regulators of the data that comes in from there. In the trials, you have three. You have a phase 1 trial, which is again a limited trial, a phase 2 trial, which study different aspects of the same immunogenicity and safety, etc. But after they complete phase 1 and phase 2 trial, you do the large trial, which is the phase 3 trial. That's where you bring in a large population, where you study all the three aspects: the immunogenicity, the safety, the efficacy of the vaccine. For that, it's important that, and especially for COVID-19, you're giving this, and vaccines are generally given to healthy individuals.
Yeah.
So, for that, it's important for us to, and you then follow them up for a long while to see that do they actually get that infection or they stay immune to it. So, there are different arms of a trial that you do. There is a control arm, a placebo arm, or a vaccine arm. So, this is a complex matter. Now, for doing this, you need to have trial sites. You need to have those healthy volunteers who are recruited for this. So, as I said, generally it's a 10 to 14 year. Now, somebody may ask, how are you actually looking at a COVID-19 vaccine? And everyone keeps asking us, when is it going to come out? But we say, okay, it's going to take a while. But even the while that we are talking about, we are saying 18 to 24 months. I mean, how have you brought that 10 to 14 years into 18 to 24 months?
And you can't compress it further, you know.
So, exactly. So, I think what is important
the
to
efficacy
understand,
of the
what is important to understand is that whenever we are compressing the time schedules, there is no compromise on any of these parameters. None of the parameters in which this data comes in terms of toxicity, safety, efficacy can be compromised with. We need that data. So, what do we compress? How do we bring it there? I think what is important is that this COVID-19 vaccine development which has started came as a challenge to all the developers. So, they looked at existing platforms. So, platforms which are already there, if you have the whole inactivated virus, or you have a rabies platform or a measles platform, on that they quickly tried to build the COVID-19 vaccine. So, that got shortened and they came forward. Again, uniquely, I mean, this is the first time that you've seen so many developers coming together, and again, as I said, nobody is working in silos. Everybody is working together. There is a global consortium coming forward to give them access to the animal resources, give them access to assay labs. So, it became access to the resources which sometimes can become a challenge. So, it was fast tracking those aspects of it. We did fast track the regulatory process part of it. So, India itself, in March we put out a rapid regulatory framework which we notified, in which we said normally if an application when it comes in takes about 30 days to be looked at and accepted, for COVID we will do it in 5 days. What was important is we put in all our resources to that, because this was a challenge. I mean, it was a global challenge, so we quickly did that. So, those timings got compressed, and that is really how we have done it. But we are very pleased to see that globally, of course, there are some candidates, and few of them, about 7 of them, which are into phase 3. In India, 2 of our candidates are in phase 1 and 2 trials. The Oxford trial, which is now being done by Serum in India, that is the phase 3 trial. So, we have a number of candidates which are moving fast, many others which are at their late stage of their preclinical studies. We hope very quickly, in weeks, they would be able to get into their phase 1, phase 2 trials. So, we are all working on it, and let us see, we are hoping that this complex pathway of our scientists, our developers will finally be able to
bear fruit
and succeed.
Ma'am, tell us about the road ahead. How do you look at the post-COVID era, and how long before the vaccine, and any timeline that we could possibly look at? I know it is difficult for all, but as we talk, I think India and the world is also looking towards India and basically towards science and technology for solutions to this pandemic.
So, Nidhi, one thing is very clear, that post-COVID, it's going to be we keep talking about a new normal. And for this new normal, our scientists and researchers have to respond the way they have already. Coming to the vaccine specifically, as I said, difficult for us to predict a timeline, because our scientists, our researchers are working with it. They are trying to put in their best effort. We will have to wait for the data to come in before we know, but they will do it as quickly as they can. I mean, that is the only timeline that we want to put in. One thing is also sure, that India is a vaccine manufacturing hub. So, whatever vaccine is developed successfully, whether it is an Indian vaccine or a global vaccine, we will have manufacturing in India, because that is really what our manufacturing capacity is. And we hope, of course, Indian vaccines will come up as well, but which one comes up earliest of all, we will have to wait and watch. So, India is going to play a very major role in the vaccine manufacture and obviously the access to that. As we look at the road ahead, I think it is not just vaccine manufacturing. India is going to play a very important role to be a biomanufacturing hub. And this COVID has given us not just the levels of encouragement for it, but we also have now a challenge which our scientists and researchers have come forward. When we had the Science Congress this year in January, our Honorable Prime Minister had actually put out a challenge for us and said, by 2025, India will be a 100 billion biomanufacturing hub. We have taken that challenge, and this is now our opportunity to be able to respond to that challenge. So, whether it is biomanufacturing for vaccines, whether it is diagnostics, whether it is the resources that I spoke about, which are important for any of the diagnostic, vaccine, therapeutic development, whether it is looking at animal models, whether it is looking at assays, whether it is looking at any of our components for diagnostics, and this is the biopharma sector. We also have a bioagri sector. We have a bioindustrial sector where you look at enzymes, a large number of enzymes, the bioagri products that you are talking about. So, India definitely is going to be positioned as a biomanufacturing hub, and we will not only be able to look at challenges for the country, but how do we respond to global challenges. We see a very bright future for that. We see that the road has already been sort of put out very clearly, the roadmap is there. Our scientists and researchers are already identifying what those key gaps are which they need to fill in, and we hope that this target that we have put out for ourselves of a 150 billion biotech industry by 2025 and a 100 billion biomanufacturing hub is something which will be a reality.
And on that note, many thanks for joining us today and sharing your insights and very precious views with all our viewers. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
And to all our viewers, I'd like to end with the Victorian poet Robert Browning when he said, "A man's reach must always outreach his grasp, or what's a heaven for. Jeetega Bharat, harega Corona." On that note, many thanks for watching. Namaskar.